Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at this Bachmann Santa Fè EMD diesel locomotive that's been given to me by my friend Lorna to have a look at and restore to running order, as her partner bought it, but as you can see there is some damage to it and apparently it's a poor runner. So we're going to put it on the track, give it a battery test, and we'll have a look at getting this loco restored. Applying the battery to the track. Initially, the Bachmann loco did shoot off backwards, but then it becomes incredibly jolty and it won't run at all. So there's obviously something amiss here. The clips holding the body on have actually been damaged, and the only thing holding the body in place is the screw that holds the knuckle couplers in place. So I'm going to remove these from either end and have a look inside this Bachmann diesel. This will be the first time I've ever worked on an American Bachmann diesel, but when I take the body off, although the chassis is slightly different, the centrally mounted motor and drive shafts to the bogie towers are almost identical to that of the Bachmann Class 24s and 25s that I've owned in the past, so this shouldn't be too bad a restoration job. Putting some leads directly to the pickup lines there, you can see that the lights work and the wheels were actually turning round. So it looks like this diesel just needs a bogie overhaul and general cleanup. The bogies are released from a screw in the top of the die-cast chassis block there, exactly the same as I said before as some British outline Bachmann diesels. So unscrewing the small screw, it allows the bogie to be pulled through, and there's enough excess wire there to pull it out and service it and clean it all up without having to desolder any wires. There's no lubrication on this model whatsoever. It is absolutely bone dry, so we're going to have to lubricate this up so that it improves its running. The bogie plate just unclips there, and the wheels are held in place by the plastic. There are no proper bearings on this model. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my cotton bud dipped in methylated spirits, and I'm going to clean the pickups, which are quite dirty considering, and I'm going to give the whole bogie tower a wipe to remove any fluff and detritus that has gathered there over the past few years. I'm also going to clean the backs of the wheels and the axles, as there's some of the typical old white Bachmann grease that has gone hard over time, so this will all need removing and the loco re-lubricating before putting it back together. I'm also going to give the wheels a good clean up, and as you can see on the end of that cotton bud, they were incredibly dirty. You can see there what I meant about this horrible white yellowy grease that Bachmann use, which does have a habit of going hard over time. So if you have any Bachmann diesels stored in a garage or a loft that you haven't used in a few years, it may be worth just getting them out to check, or at least check before you next run them. Once the wheels have all been cleaned and the pickups, the wheels are simply pushed back into place in those plastic clips, ensuring that the pickups are behind each wheel and that they're pressing on the wheel backs. I'm going to use a small amount of silicone grease with a cocktail stick and just apply some grease to the drivetrain, as there was no lubrication on this model now, as I've cleaned all the old lubrication off. The bogie frame itself wasn't too bad. This was just given a quick rub over with a methylated spirit soaked cotton bud just to remove any dried on grease and hair that had become entangled in it when it had been running in the past. I'm just now going to add a very, very small amount of oil just on top of that grease, just to dilute it down a little bit. And then I'm going to clip the bogie plate back in place. This will only go on one way. There is a large and a small clip. You just locate the clips in and just snap it in place. I'm also going to put a small amount of silicone grease on the worm gear there, which will work its way through the drivetrain. This again is topped off with a very small amount of oil, as is that bearing on the back of the drive shaft. And turning that in there with finger pressure ensures that that grease is spread evenly through the drivetrain within that bogie. To replace the bogie, you just have to simply line up the drive shaft with the opening on the motor, and then make sure that the plastic lug is sticking through the die-cast chassis where it should be, and then retightening the screw to fasten it back in place. Once this has been put back in place, I'm going to put a battery test to the wheels, whereas remember it wouldn't work before, but now that that's been cleaned up, you can see the lights are working and the wheels are turning round. So it is just a case of dirt and dirt build-up on this model. The bogie on the opposite end was cleaned up in exactly the same fashion, cleaning the pickups, the wheel backs, the wheel treads, and re-lubricating the drivetrain after removing all the old grease. These are quite simple locos to work on, and the motors in them, the Buehler can motor, is an extremely powerful and reliable unit. I've had Bachmann diesels for over 20 years fitted with this motor, and I've never had one fail on me yet, touch wood. So now the chassis has been rebuilt completely. I'm going to test each wheel here, and you can just see there the light denotes that the pickup has been restored, and it was just a general build-up of dirt that was preventing this model from running. It is especially important when you put these sort of models together to get the drive shafts back in correctly. That chassis is running 100% better than it was when we first started this rebuild. So I'm just going to put a small amount of oil there on a couple of bearing clips that I'd missed. And then we're going to turn our attention to looking at the body shell. The body shell is missing the majority of its handrails. It's also missing the roof mounted horn. The handrails on this are quite flimsy and they seem to break really easily. But I was lucky when I was restoring this, as I went to the local model shop to see if they had anything I could build handrails out of, and they actually had one of these models in their tray as second hand that was a non-runner. It was an earlier version than this, so I bought that and I'm going to rob the handrails off that. First off, I'm going to give the sole bar here a clean with a cotton bud that's been dipped in warm water, and just look at the amount of horrible dirt that's on this model. This warrants a full-on wash, so I've got a tub here full of soapy warm water, and I'm going to give the whole body shell a good scrubbing with this old toothbrush. I have now been banned from using my wife's toothbrush. The dental bills were just getting a bit out of hand, and she seemed to get the hump every time I used it, so I invested in my own. Scrubbing this body shell, I clean all the windows and every nook and cranny and remove all the dirt. If you look carefully, you can see the dirt dripping off into that clean water in the bowl. I don't know where this model had been stored or whether it was nicotine stained, but there was quite a lot of dirt encrusting this model, even though it did seem relatively clean to start with. I then polish up all the hard to reach places with a cotton bud, just using the water that was left on the body shell from washing it, and I go in all the nooks and crannies on the doors and make sure that every piece of dirt has been removed from this model. This really did come up shining. The livery application from Bachmann was really quite good, and it has stood out the test of time and is nice and bright. This is the older version of the EMD unit that I bought to rob all the parts off. This is a non-runner, and you can see here it's got sellotape all on the side of it, but the handrails were complete. This model is unclipped, and you can see it's got a mainline style motor in it, like a pancake affair, so I won't be restoring this. Once I've robbed all the parts I need, the chassis will go into my spares box, although the battery test there proves that the motor did actually run a little bit, but on the track again it didn't run. But the motor will go into my spares box, as I was saying, and will provide parts for mainline models in my own collection. These handrails are slightly different to the ones on the newer model, in that they are one piece cast and they don't clip into the body side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove them as gently as I can without breaking them from this body shell, including these ones on the front here, and I'm going to clip them off, and then I'm going to use some fast setting super glue to glue them to the side of the model. This does make them very fragile, and I have told the owner this when he took the model back, but it's better to have these handrails on than none at all. I'm also going to repair this handrail that's been quite smashed on the back of this model, as the one on the donor model was also broken, so I'm going to have to work with what I've got. The first handrail to go on was the front handrail here. This was a simple clip fit into the holes that were already in the body shell. And as I said, others were clipped off the sprue and were glued to the side of the model. The super glue I use, this Loctite stuff, tends not to leave any white residual mess, but only if you use it sparingly, which is what I did here. I did handle the model quite frequently when putting it back together, and I only broke one of the spindles off. But you have to agree that now that's all back together and the handrails are back on, it looks 100 times better than not having any at all. I also got this replacement horn unit off the donor model, as there's a hole in the roof of this one where that original had broken off. This again was fixed in place with a small amount of Loctite superglue. It simply just clip fits into that hole there, and the superglue ensures that it will stay put through years of future use. The whole thing was then set aside and left overnight for the glue to fully harden. Once the glue had hardened, I was looking at the fragility here of the handrails. The Bodyshell was replaced onto the chassis, and I can see here that it's this clip that has broken off on both sides. So what I do, I'm going to repair that with some brass rod. Before I do anything else, I'm going to give the wheels a polish up with the fiberglass pencil, with the loco inverted in my loco cradle. This actually proved to be quite difficult, as after I'd cleaned the wheels, the force of the loco cradle had actually damaged the handrails again. So they were re-glued. As usual, after polishing up with the fiberglass pencil, the wheel treads were polished up with a cotton bud and methylated spirits. So now that I've got the Bodyshell all back on and the handrails repaired again, you can see this model is now on home straight. That piece of brass there was glued behind the Bodyshell plastic and was left to dry and then clipped in place. However, you can see on that fuel tank that part of that white superglue bloom that I spoke of before. So this was all touched up with some matte black paint. And now I'm going to refit the KD knuckle couplers to each end. Although if you really wanted to, you could fit these dapole tension lock couplers, which would fit in the screw holes. That was a relatively quick rebuild this time, which makes a change. And if you've got a loco you'd like to see featured on an episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. The email address you see on the screen, and we'll have a look at getting it sent over, and who knows, it may feature in an episode all of its own. I'll leave you now with a couple of views of this Bachmann model running around my son's layout with some American freight cars, and I will catch you again in the next video. Please like, share and subscribe, and I thank you all so much for watching. Bye bye for now. Okay, come on, out of the way.